My ex-wife had a car accident and lost her memory. She became a 20-year-old girl, her memories frozen at the time when she loved me the most. Holbrook Smith, so you're my husband 10 years later. Stella jumped off the hospital bed, both surprised and delighted. She rushed over and hugged me tightly. This isn't a dream, right? Oh my God. My secret crush actually came true. I was stunned as she held me, but all I felt inside was desolation. Stella, you forgot that we got divorced last month, I said softly. And it was you who cheated. Ding. Story Shots reminds you to click the subscribe button at the bottom right corner to read the full novel. During the new year, everyone else was joyful. Only I, the big fool, was waiting helplessly at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau. I waited all day. Until the staff got off work, I still hadn't seen my ex-wife. Damn it. Divorce was her idea, the contract was signed, and now she goes missing when it's time to process the paperwork. Is this a joke? I glared, furiously calling her phone, but it was always turned off. By the time it was dark and the Civil Affairs Bureau closed, I definitely wouldn't be able to get divorced today. I walked dejectedly into the parking lot, ready to drive away. Just as I started the car, my phone rang. Hello. Are you a relative of Miss Stella Roberts? We are from the First People's Hospital. Ms. Roberts has been in a car accident. Great. Not only did I fail to get divorced, but I also received a scam call. Without hesitation, I said, yes, I'm Stella's husband. Is she dying? Don't waste medical resources. Just give up on treatment. Yes, I said it. I will take full responsibility. Just send her to the morgue. The other party was taken aback by my words. Ms. Roberts only has a leg fracture. This young doctor seemed inexperienced with dealing with patients' families. He was nervous. We've already put her leg in a cast and set the bones. If it's convenient for you, could you come by? His words were vague. I frowned, feeling something was off, and politely declined. No need. A fracture isn't a big deal. I'm quite busy, so I won't come. Oh, he sounded a bit disappointed but still asked. Also, Ms. Roberts was in the car accident with Bernard Thomas, and we can't reach his family. Do you know him? Hearing that name, I perked up. I know him. What happened? He's seriously injured with extensive bruising all over his body. He might end up with a disability in his hand and will have significant scarring. I'm on my way. I was overjoyed, shouting, You're the First People's Hospital, right? What floor and room? I'll be there in 20 minutes. The doctor replied, We're on the 5th floor of the 2nd district. I hung up and slammed the gas pedal. The black SUV shot out like a shark, merging into the bustling traffic. After receiving the call, my gloomy mood lifted instantly. Yes, my ex-wife broke her leg in the accident. Who cares if she lives or dies? But that pretty boy's accident left him disfigured and possibly disabled. Such a good opportunity doesn't come around often. How could I miss such a show? When it came to Stella, I felt indifferent. Hearing that Bernard Thomas was disfigured, I ran all the way, even skipping the hospital elevator, climbing the 5 floors. I was truly anxious, afraid I would miss it. The doctors couldn't believe I arrived so quickly. I burst into the ward, beaming with excitement. Where's Bernard Thomas? How bad is his hand? What kind of scars will he have? Show me. Show me. Everyone in the ward stared at me, their faces awkward. I felt no embarrassment at all. I just felt exhilarated. Where is he? Where is he? But the next second, the curtain around the bed was drawn back. Stella lay there with her leg in a cast, looking at me with a puzzled expression. My face fell instantly, but she looked at me, her voice trembling and confused. Are you Holbrook Smith's brother? I coldly sneered. I'm your father. I didn't know what I hit on Stella's mind. She clutched her head, showing pain, and lay back down. The doctor pulled me out of the ward, explaining, Ms. Roberts has a concussion, and her memory is disordered. When we asked her some basic questions, she knew them, but when we asked her age, she said she was 20. I was absent-minded. The The doctor noticed the situation. Mr. Thomas's ward is on the 6th floor. He's still not out of life-threatening danger. You can look at him through the glass. Without a word, I dashed off. Everyone exchanged glances. When I finally reached the 6th floor, I saw Bernard Thomas. I witnessed this pretty boy who destroyed my marriage, lying there wrapped in bandages. Just days ago, he had been flaunting in front of me, and now he lay there with his right hand curled oddly, his once handsome face now marred. Out of humanitarian concern, I felt pity. But thinking of what he had done to me, my humanitarianism vanished. I was not human. When I returned to the 5th floor, I pulled out cash from my wallet, ready to give red envelopes to everyone present. Yes, I want everyone to feel my happiness together. And indeed, everyone felt it. The doctor trembled slightly as he held the money. Mr. Smith, the patient's condition is a bit complicated, and our medical facilities are limited. I waved my hand grandly. She thinks she's 20? Then let her be 20, it doesn't matter. I think you guys are pretty good. Treat her. If she dies or gets worse, I won't make a fuss. Everyone was speechless. The room fell silent. They couldn't find the words. In this hospital room, there were doctors, nurses, and in the corner stood Stella's secretary and lawyer. They were afraid of being seen by me, so they desperately turned sideways and shrank back. I chuckled. I can't speak on Stella's treatment. In the end, I took the initiative to admit to the doctor. Although we haven't completed the legal procedures, we have signed the divorce agreement, and I can no longer represent her. This is her assistant and lawyer. I pointed to the corner. The person I pointed at trembled all over. They couldn't face me and became even more evasive. I said, "You can discuss it with them." The secretary and lawyer nodded submissively. Seeing this, I found it particularly amusing. You helped with the divorce, but you're just workers. I pulled out a cigarette, placed it between my lips, and bit down without lighting it. I smiled at them. You don't need to be afraid of facing me. I'm not a bad person. The secretary stood there awkwardly, feeling utterly embarrassed. And this lawyer, who looked relatively young and somewhat stiff, turned bright red when I smiled at her, her refined face losing its elite demeanor. Mr. Smith. The lawyer's face flushed, and even her metal-framed glasses couldn't uphold her professional image. She said to me, "You don't have to come." Yeah. I was in a good mood and very carefree. I'm about to leave. Upon hearing this, the curtain around the sickbed was suddenly pulled back. Stella had endured another headache and had regained consciousness. The secretary hurried over. This version of Ms. Roberts, whose memories were stuck at 20 years old, scanned the room but ignored her trusted aides. She looked at me, her expression confused and dazed. "Holbrook, how did you change so much? You look like you've aged a bit." I touched my face. Yeah, after all, it's been 10 years. Who wouldn't age? I didn't want to argue with this potential madwoman and simply turned to leave. But then there was a loud crash behind me. It was Stella, dragging her broken leg with a cast, trying to get out of bed. She lost her balance and fell. She tumbled to the ground and scrambled toward me like a madwoman. "Holbrook, don't go!" The secretary rushed to help her but was pushed away. This version of Ms. Roberts, with only 20 years of memories, completely didn't recognize her trusted aide. Her face was filled with confusion, misunderstanding, and urgency. "I don't know any of you. Stay out of this. Holbrook, wait for me. Take me with you." She fell on the ground, shouting toward the door, helpless and desperately calling for a lifeline. "Don't leave me behind." I had already stepped out of the hospital room. Hearing the commotion, I was indeed very surprised and turned back to look. Stella was a hotshot in the tech world. She rose from nothing, became famous at a young age, and by 25 or 26, she had made a name for herself as a well-known female CEO. Anyone who saw her would politely call her Ms. Roberts. Along with her fame came her strict coldness, difficult to get along with, and keeping people at arm's length. Now, she was sprawled on the ground, her image shattered, desperately trying to crawl toward me. I suddenly turned back, squatting in front of her, and asked, "Do you really only recognize me? Who am I?" Stella reached out and grabbed my arm, not being polite at all. She was afraid I would run away again. "This question," Stella answered fluently. "You're Holbrook, you live next to me, your dad is Braxton, your mom is a high school teacher. You're severely allergic to peanuts and seafood. If you eat even a little, you'll swell up immediately." Well, that was all correct. The corner of my mouth twitched. You think you're 20, right? Then think about it. When we were 20, we were in our sophomore year of college. Look at your old face now. Do you look like a college student? Stella touched her face and then looked at me. For some reason, her face actually turned red. "I heard the doctor call you." Stella, dragging her broken leg, sat on the floor. Her expression was very serious and solemn, but her gaze toward me started to drift back and forth. "I know I'm not 20. When I saw you, I knew it. I must have hit my head and forgotten these past few years." She squeezed my arm and finally said, You're my husband now." I didn't say anything. At that moment, I felt exhausted. After all, before coming here, I had already waited all day at the Civil Affairs Bureau, witnessing countless couples become husband and wife and countless couples parting ways. There, I told myself that when I separated from Stella, I definitely couldn't love and hate like them. In the end, I wanted to maintain my dignity. I'm someone who cares about appearances. But I never expected that Stella, that reckless fool, would drive like a madwoman and crash into the guardrail with that pretty boy. So I stood up right away, because Stella was gripping my arm tightly and wouldn't let go. I had no choice but to pull her up with me. Stella had a leg in a cast and could only stand on one foot. She was watching the secretary and the lawyer warily, like a wounded beast that had lost its pack. To get us out of this mess, I pulled the secretary over and said, "You are Stella Roberts, 30 years old this year. You are now the founder and CEO of Longshoe Technology Company. This is your secretary and the company's legal counsel. You can trust them." Stella looked at them, frowning. I smiled at her and said, "Even if you don't remember, congratulations. Stella, at 30, you really have made it big." But she just stared at me blankly. She asked, "How many years have we been married?" I patiently replied, 5 years. Stella calculated the time in her mind, her gaze drifting again. "We got together right after graduating from college, so, do we have children?" I paused for a moment. "Yes," I said calmly. "But when they were 4 months old, we lost them." Stella took a step back. Those words pierced her like a needle, and she instinctively released her grip on my arm, starting to tremble. But she didn't even know where this sudden reaction came from. She stood there, dazed, shaking violently. A sudden wave of pain hit her, tearing her heart apart, even making her unable to control herself. She hugged her head again, saying painfully, "Holbrook, I watched coldly, remaining indifferent, until Stella curled up, hugging her head again, and collapsed. I stood with my hands in my pockets, watching her tremble on the hospital bed, her features twisted, tears streaming down her face. The doctor and nurse rushed over to care for her, while everyone else was caught off guard. In the midst of the chaos, I said to the secretary, "Please rearrange things and schedule an appointment with the Civil Affairs Bureau. We'll handle the paperwork again next Wednesday." The secretary looked at me in a panic. She hesitated, unsure of what to say, and I had already turned to leave. I got married when I was 25. The timing was neither too early nor too late, just right as we were at our poorest. At that time, I couldn't scrape together 100 yuan. So I bought a 58 yuan strawberry cake, lit some candles, and proposed to Stella with that. I can't say it was simple. I can only say it was quite shabby. While others celebrated their love with flowers, diamond rings, and romantic dinners, we had only that cake. We squeezed into a rented room, getting cake all over our faces. After finishing the cake, still hungry, I went into the kitchen to make instant noodles. The kitchen was small, filled with steam rising from the pot. Stella suddenly walked in and said, Why don't we just get married? I was stunned for a moment and replied, sure. The next day, we went to the Civil Affairs Bureau and got our marriage certificate, becoming a legal couple. We grew up next to each other, childhood sweethearts. Our hearts were in sync, from our naive youth to standing tall at 30. There were no white moonlight, no green tea bitches, no unexpected male interlopers. We understood each other and fought side by side. Finally, in the year I turned 30, my company secured several projects thanks to our technology. And investments flooded in like the sea. We rode this wave to become the new elites of the city. But at 31, I caught Stella and her male secretary in bed together. Our marriage shattered on the spot. At that moment in my own home, Stella lay on the bed, still drunk from the night before, and when she saw us burst in, she didn't even know what was happening. I poured a bottle of mineral water over her face. Meanwhile, wrapped in a towel, Bernard was cornered in the bathroom by my friends. A good man needs 3 helpers. Seeing so many of my good friends, he was utterly panicked, wishing he could kneel and beg for mercy. It was Ms. Roberts who asked me to keep her company. He stammered. I'm just an intern. How could I refuse my boss? Is that all? My friends immediately started rolling up their sleeves, ready to take action. If I had known you had this talent, I would have transferred you to the marketing department. I smiled at him, a chilling smile. Just so happens our client, Mr. Wong, likes young boys. Since you can't refuse others, why not go with it and close that deal? The year-end bonus is more than 100,000. Bernard didn't expect my thought process to be this unconventional. For a moment, he was speechless. Seeing that I really intended to exploit him, Bernard could only cling to the towel, weakly defending himself. I truly care about Ms. Roberts. What a lowly pretty boy. How foolish. I was even amused by his stupidity at the time, but soon enough I couldn't laugh anymore. Because Stella wiped the water off her face, got dressed, and calmly walked off the bed to talk to me about divorce. Yes, she was ready to divorce me, ignoring the loss of our shared assets and the company's operations. She was determined to take off the wedding ring from my hand within 3 months. She even packed her things that very night and moved out of our home. I threw a fit, yelled, and even smashed up the company office. But our marriage was already in ruins. This greatly affected my mental state. During the divorce negotiations, I was also outmaneuvered by her trusted secretary. The divorce agreement stated that the company had nothing to do with me, and I could only take 1/3 of our shared assets. Even the house that my parents bought for us, Stella was entitled to half. Couldn't believe it, but it was too late, and everything was in disarray. When I finally accepted reality and agreed to the divorce, Stella, that foolish woman, had a car accident that caused her to lose her memory. Stella truly remembered nothing. All her experiences from the years vanished in an instant. She had genuinely achieved the meaning of after half a lifetime, returning still as a girl through a car accident. Company affairs, business dealings, everything was a complete mess. She understood nothing. Her memory was stuck at the age of 20, so Ms. Roberts could only solve quadratic equations and had no idea how to run the company. She sat there, looking at the documents brought by the secretary, her mind completely blank. But she still remembered me. I couldn't even recall what I was like at 20. Yet, the 20-year-old Stella was so vivid and beautiful that it was hard to pretend not to see her, especially since she only recognized me. To be honest, after all these years, the one thing I never expected was how thick-skinned Stella's trusted secretary was. After all, when I was battling for a divorce with Stella, that woman had played me dirty. This trusted secretary secretly helped Stella transfer the company's shares and then used the board of directors to kick me out. I lost my management and control over the company, as well as a significant amount of equity. This led to a loss of at least 50 million. Among all the shared marital assets, I only received 1/3. Last time at the hospital, I was just being polite, pretending to be cordial. But what I didn't expect was that she was truly impolite. This trusted secretary actually brought Stella to my house to confront me. Because Stella wanted to see me, the secretary used me as bait. tricking this very immature female CEO into participating in an important executive meeting. Then she fulfilled her promise and came to confront me. When they arrived, I was in the middle of moving. On the day I caught Stella cheating, she had moved out of our shared home immediately. With divorce looming, I naturally couldn't stay there any longer. A friend of mine helped me find an apartment, and I completed the purchase last month. Everything else was nearly set up, but I was reluctant to part with the good furniture in this house, thinking about moving it as well. After all, these belongings weren't cheap, but it looked like a new male owner would soon enjoy them. If that's the case, I might as well move out directly. So, when we met, the atmosphere was delicate. The secretary felt awkward. After all, she had caused me such a significant loss. I felt guilty too, since I was secretly moving our marital fixed assets. This time, the secretary took the initiative. She said to me, "Smith, I'm just an employee. We're each working for our own interests. Ms. Roberts has helped me a lot, so I cannot be confused in such a significant matter." I rolled my eyes at her. Right, the kindness of a benefactor. A servant dies for their lord. So, I must be the unlucky one? What she lost was just her boss, while I lost a substantial 50 million. We were whispering on this side of the balcony, while Stella had already turned the entire house upside down. When she saw me and the secretary whispering together, she became a bit agitated and came over to pull us apart. She pointed at the packed boxes and asked me, "Is this going to be our future home? I think this place is nice. Why are we moving out now? Or are we getting a bigger, more luxurious one?" I glanced at her. "I'm moving out, you're still living here." Stella didn't understand. I said coldly, "Because we agreed to divorce last month. The reason is that you cheated." I never expected Stella's reaction. Upon hearing this, she paused for a moment and then burst into laughter, as if she had heard an unprecedented joke. Her laughter was hearty and bright. "Don't joke like that." The 20-year-old Stella laughed and said, "How could I ever divorce you?" I looked at her with a calm expression. "There's no feast that doesn't end. Even between you and me, we will part ways." "Impossible." She said this decisively, almost reflexively. "If you say we're not together, that's fine, but since we're married, I can't possibly separate from you." This made me laugh, because she really had forgotten so much. She forgot the harsh, even ruthless, and very unfavorable property division that was cruel to me. She forgot the cold, silent, and numb expression she wore when she placed that divorce agreement in front of me. She forgot that she once told me, "Let's just forget it. We're both free now." The memory of 20-year-old Stella Roberts is like this. She remembers nothing, he knows nothing. She blindly believes that she will be with me in the future, that we will eventually be together and will never be apart. So at that moment, malicious thoughts churned in my heart. Why is it always me, the man, who gets hurt or victimized? No, I want to hurt her too. I want to make her sad. So I asked her back, "Why? Why do you think we won't separate?" Stella Roberts looked at me. At that moment, the images of her at 20 and 30 intertwined in her. But her gaze was so focused and serious. She earnestly said to me, "Because I liked you for so many years. It was so hard to finally have you. How could I possibly let you go?" As soon as those words left her mouth, the room fell silent. The secretary's expression shattered, unsure how her boss, who seemed to have lost her memory, was acting like a lovesick fool, crazily professing love to her ex-husband despite the divorce. And I didn't say anything, because 20-year-old Stella Roberts truly liked me, just as she said. Those words were indeed a bit cheesy. After saying that, Stella herself couldn't handle it anymore and awkwardly found an excuse to visit the kitchen and left. The balcony felt empty, leaving just me and the secretary standing together. The secretary looked at my expression, not daring to speak. What could be said? "Congratulations. Our boss has fallen in love with you again." Or, "Sorry, the boss isn't quite right in the head, but the divorce process has to go on." Nothing could be said, nothing felt appropriate. Because this Stella Roberts, who loved me so much, was living 10 years ago. Now, she had only briefly forgotten the grievances between us. No matter how beautiful the dream is, it's still a bubble. Once she remembers, everything will be revealed. 20-year-old Stella Roberts would risk everything for me. 21 but 30-year-old Stella Roberts had already lost her feelings, and we looked at each other with weariness. Even now, they briefly overlapped. Our marriage was already irretrievable. But as I watched Stella wandering aimlessly in the kitchen, I suddenly smiled. This smile was light and gentle, as if a spring breeze had passed, or perhaps I was genuinely at ease, returning to the passion of our early romance. Maybe it was the true feelings of 20-year-old Stella Roberts that moved me. I not only didn't move out, but I even actively invited her to stay for dinner, smiling broadly and eagerly cooking. Yes, the way I looked at her was also very gentle, as if I were looking at the person I loved most in the world. Stella Roberts was initially a bit taken aback, but soon, she mustered her courage and got used to it. Yes, it had already been 10 years. She and I had been married for 5 years. We were just a couple sitting down to have a meal together. What's the problem with that? Seeing her dazed expression, my smile grew even wider. The amnesiac Stella Roberts is still Stella Roberts. The memory of 20-year-old Stella Roberts is also Stella Roberts. Since she is Stella Roberts, then we can amend the legal documents and she can willingly give. Very good. I think I know how to reclaim the $50 million I am owed. At first, when the topic of divorce was brought up, Stella Roberts and I fought fiercely. It was really crazy. We fought like it was the end of the world. Because the company was built by both of us together, splitting up now caused a complete upheaval. Even the employees were forced to take sides. As for Bernard Thomas, he was the last straw that broke the camel's back, suddenly becoming a pariah. But as I was trapped and lost control of the company, things changed completely. After all, the situation was pressing. My marriage was my own business. No matter how the employees sympathized with me, they had to make a living and couldn't compromise their salaries for me. So, even though everyone looked down on Bernard Thomas's actions, they reluctantly accepted him as the next boss. Perhaps Bernard Thomas himself thought so too. Until today, Stella Roberts held my hand and walked into the company. Everyone was stunned. Stella Roberts at 20 was when she loved me the most. Even though I was no longer the same naive boy in her memory, no longer wearing a school uniform, she still devoted herself to me completely. I was no longer the simple boy from before. Over the years, I had faced many storms, and with my understanding of her, I effortlessly made her infatuated and crazy for me. This situation caught everyone off guard. But most of the company's employees were very happy for us. After all, many of them were veterans of our initial team. They witnessed us struggle side by side, climbing step by step. When the marriage crisis arose, they genuinely felt sorry for us. Now that they see us back together as before, they feel very good about it. But there were also those who were not so happy. That was the secretary. She joined the company later, so what she saw at first was me and Stella Roberts in a very bad relationship. Now, the secretary watched the amnesiac Stella Roberts spinning around me like a fool, desperately acting like my devoted admirer. The secretary thought the boss just bumped her head and her mind was temporarily out of order. Similarly, the secretary was also very wary of me, fearing that I would deceive her boss, whose mind was clearly troubled, and do something that would harm his interests. So she tried to offer Stella some very unpleasant advice. Stella smiled slightly. Then she exploded in anger, slamming her hand on the table and kicking the secretary out of the office. They almost got into a fight. What the secretary wanted to say was actually very simple. Condensed into one sentence: "Boss, this guy is not a good person." Stella's current thought process was even simpler than hers. Holbrook Smith is not a good person. So you are a good person? Stella's veins bulged on her forehead. Her face flushed red as she stood in the office and shouted without caring about her image. She was truly furious. I've known Holbrook Smith for so many years. We are neighbors, do you understand? When I was 16, my parents ran away from their debts, and I couldn't even pay my tuition. It was Holbrook Smith who used all his pocket money to support me. He didn't even eat breakfast every day, saving the money for my meals. Stella was almost going crazy, her eyes bloodshot as she yelled, "Holbrook Smith doesn't have much money at home either. If his parents found out about this, they would definitely blame him for meddling." Holbrook Smith knelt down and begged them to help me, to give me a chance. At this point, Stella bit her back teeth tightly. Her face was red with anger, but tears streamed down her face. She cried, "What right do you all have to say he's bad? In this world, he is the best person to me. I only have him. When I was 16, my mom shoved me to someone to pay off a debt, and that person wanted to chop off my hand. Holbrook Smith stood in front of me and said if anyone was going to be chopped, it should be his hand. You all say that Holbrook Smith is good to me now just to scheme for my company. If it weren't for Holbrook Smith, how could I possibly have today's company? Everything I have should go to him." The secretary, drenched in coffee, looked very embarrassed. I stood quietly outside the office, listening to the shouting inside. Employees passing by heard these words, their expressions fascinating. They couldn't help but sneak glances at me, as if watching the tragic male lead of a drama. They all remembered the previous divorce uproar when I was cuckolded, and we made a huge scene. Now the mentally disturbed Stella was there, raging with deep feelings. But in her normal state, she had once been merciless towards me in the same place. No matter how deep the youthful love was, this is how it turned out. I said nothing. Stella still wanted to explode. I knocked on the door to attract their attention inside. "It's already 12 o'clock. I smiled at her. "What do you want to eat? I'm a bit hungry." Upon hearing my words, Stella immediately dropped her anger and the unpleasant secretary. She rushed over to me, pulling me outside. "Let's hurry to eat," she said. "You never eat breakfast and now you must be feeling awful." "It's okay." I gently held her hand and said, "They are just looking out for you. No need to get so angry. It was better not to mention this." Once I did, Stella exploded again. She cursed. "Do you know what they said? They said you are trying to take my money, wanting to steal my company." I smiled gently, even lifting my hand to wipe the sweat from her forehead. "What if I really thought that? Then I'd give you everything." Stella blurted out, "You are Holbrook Smith. If you ask me for something, how could I not give it?" Upon hearing this, my smile grew even brighter. I even took the initiative to hug her. "I know," I whispered in her ear. "Stella, you are the best to me." Hearing this, Stella almost floated with joy. She excitedly pulled me out of the company, shouting that she wanted to eat something good. I went along with her, only pulling out my phone to send a WeChat message to my lawyer. The content was very simple. "Have you prepared the contract I wanted?" The other party, a seasoned professional lawyer, replied without asking anything. "It's ready, completely fine. We can sign this afternoon." Seeing this, I put away my phone, feeling a weight lift from my heart. Who knows when Stella's mind will suddenly clear up. A long night brings many dreams. Whether in business or marriage, only the one who acts first can laugh last. Stella thinks that I, in my 30s, am mature and gentle. These years have changed me a lot. But when I smile at her, she thinks I am still her Holbrook Smith. About those blank years, Stella was very curious, asking me questions left and right. I patiently answered her one by one. At the beginning, we set up a stall and made our first bucket of gold. I bought a broken machine from a scrap dealer, fixed it up, and we used it to produce pirated music tapes, selling them on the streets. Later, our business got so good that we expanded and raised a batch of subordinates, only responsible for supplying them. The first week, we made $50,000. In the elegantly decorated restaurant, I took a sip of lemonade. I gently said, "But in this business, there are always local tyrants. If we recklessly barge in and break the rules, many people will come to our house with steel pipes and machetes looking for us." We had to give them most of the money before they were willing to leave. At that time, you were terrified and cried terribly. But I was afraid they would really chop off your hand. So I shook all over but still stood in front of you. Stella believed these words wholeheartedly. Because I am Holbrook Smith. These things are indeed what I could do for her. She trusts me as if she trusts herself. As we spoke, I had already cut my steak and handed it to her. Tender and caring, with delicate emotions. So she increasingly couldn't believe we were divorced. How could she possibly divorce me? After so many years weathering storms together, especially since our initial feelings were as solid as a rock. We had been through so many years together. How could you tell her that one day we would grow to dislike each other, resent each other, hate each other, and insult each other? She would never believe it. How ridiculous. I glanced at my phone. My lawyer had arrived at the office. At that moment, I immediately put down my knife and fork, said I was full, and that I had some work to finish, so I needed to return to the office. Stella was very considerate of me. Without thinking, she quickly finished the steak. What work is so urgent that you can't even eat properly? I'll help you when we get back. You can help, I said gently. I really need your signature. Stella didn't even think twice, didn't look at me, and spoke without a second thought. With a wave of her hand, she said, as long as I can help you share the burden, I'll do anything. What is this? This is heaven helping me. I spoke softly, asking about her well-being, and held Stella's hand tightly. When crossing the street, I looked left and right, observing for 5 minutes before daring to take her across. In the elevator, I made sure she kept a 1-meter distance from others. I was afraid something would happen midway, or something would fall on her head, turning her back into that cheating woman who made me wear a green hat, ruining my big plans. The lawyer was already in my office, ready to go. Several contracts were neatly laid out. We had also prepared a series of recording devices to avoid any regrets from her afterward. When Stella saw this setup, she didn't quite understand what was happening, but she could read the words on the contracts. Terms like donation, transfer, and voluntary waiver confused her. She asked me, "What is this for?" I didn't answer her question, just gently held her face. I asked her, "Are you willing to give me everything you have?" Stella opened her mouth to respond, but her brain suddenly throbbed with pain. This pain made her dizzy. She even felt unsteady on her feet. She fumbled to sit down, holding her head, feeling like it was going to split. But I wouldn't let her off the hook, still asking, "Are you willing to give me your things?" Stella was in severe pain, but she gritted her teeth and replied, "I can give you everything I have. If it weren't for you, I would have died long ago. My things should be yours." I exchanged glances with the lawyer. The lawyer quickly began working. There were many places needing signatures on the contracts, and the lawyer had already marked them professionally and thoughtfully beforehand, swiftly flipping through the papers and guiding Stella to sign. Although Stella felt dizzy and wanted to vomit, I coaxed her with a few words and even kissed her cheek. Now she seemed energized. She didn't care about her headache or feeling faint anymore. Not even looking, she quickly signed her name with the pen. One person flipped through the contracts, another signed, and the efficiency was remarkable. I watched with immense satisfaction. The last time we did this, I even ended up fighting with Stella. Just signing the divorce agreement took a full month. But this time, Stella finished signing all the contracts in 5 minutes. The lawyer quickly adjusted the recording equipment and brought out the prepared text for Stella to read. Stella's head was pounding, but she didn't want to disappoint me. Even less did she want to make me sad, so she gritted her teeth and held on. The matter was about to conclude, and it was going exceptionally smoothly, too smoothly. Soon I would reclaim my assets, my company, my shares, and Stella would become a pauper. Just then, the tightly locked office door was smashed open with a fire axe. This scene was horrifying. With splintered, the door was violently broken down. We were all genuinely startled inside. Looking outside, sure enough, it was Stella's loyal secretary coming to the rescue. The secretary saw the contracts scattered across the table and the equipment set up and went wild. She just knew. This guy isn't a good person. Before, I was making a scene all over the world, in that crazy state of mind, filled with hatred. Anyone who saw me would understand that there was no turning back. Now, suddenly, I've changed my face, smiling gently and warmly. It turns out I had ulterior motives. The secretary immediately burst through the door, rushing in to stop everything. Stella had a splitting headache. Still, she held on, standing up to protect me, shouting, "What are you doing here?" Her words drove the secretary almost mad with rage. She anxiously pointed at me, shouting, "Boss, he's lying to you. He's stealing your money." Stella rolled her eyes, but her headache was so severe that the action twisted her face into a painful expression. Seeing that the boss was truly useless, the secretary was frantic. However, she had come prepared. The secretary immediately opened the office door and pushed in a person sitting in a wheelchair. "Boss, do you remember? He is Bernard Thomas," the secretary shouted. "He is your current man." Bernard Thomas was clearly brought out from the hospital on short notice, still wearing a patient gown. His wounds had not healed. He was bandaged and wrapped in gauze, a complete mess, and his right hand was bizarrely curled into a deformed mass. Indeed, he was disabled. Upon hearing this, Stella's headache vanished. Her voice grew louder, and her temper flared. She was nearly driven to the brink. She pointed at Bernard Thomas and said, "Have you lost your mind? I abandoned Holbrook Smith just to find him." This was truly heartbreaking. Bernard glanced at Stella. Although he had indeed seduced her and taken advantage of the situation, and Stella didn't think highly of him, hearing that still made him uncomfortable. He said, "Ms. Roberts, I am sincere towards you. This pretty boy was really not very bright and quite foolish." Repeating the same line, I was tired of hearing it. Stella seemed to have heard something utterly ridiculous. She even directly questioned it aloud. In front of everyone, under the public gaze, she mockingly pointed at me and said, "I've known Holbrook Smith for over a decade, been married for 5 years, sharing joys and sorrows. You think I would divorce Holbrook Smith for someone like him? Can I believe that? Am I foolish? What is he compared to Holbrook Smith?" Strangely, her words plunged the room into silence. Yes, the question Stella posed was sharp and hit the nail on the head. After knowing each other for so long, with feelings as strong as gold, would we really break apart because of a lowly male mistress? Because of this foolish pretty boy Bernard Thomas? No, the problems between us had arisen long before, and these problems were irreparable. The secretary opened her mouth. She couldn't answer that question. Long before she knocked on the door, I had already made a phone call. The head of the company's security department is my relative. At that moment, a large group of security guards rushed in like wolves, directly grabbing the secretary and Bernard Thomas, pushing and shoving them out. Thankfully, they saved me those last 10 minutes. The lawyer was immediately fully professional, leading Stella through the entire process. When the last red fingerprint was stamped, it was finally accomplished. The matter was settled. I had money again. I put away the contracts and the USB drives with recordings and locked them in the safe. Soon, this safe would be sent to the bank and no one could access it. The lawyer would hold onto the copies, continuing with some remaining procedures, ensuring I would completely receive what I deserved. Money, shares, the company. These were all mine. The 20-year-old Stella was just young. She wasn't foolish. After going through that process, she already understood what I was trying to do. But she still cooperated. Just as she said, she sincerely believed that these things were what I deserved. Because I am Holbrook Smith. So when I asked her for things, she had to give them to me. Yet she had a question in her heart. With hesitation on her face, she asked me, "Was that person really the pretty boy I found? How could I be looking for him?" She seemed to have heard something absurd. "I already have you. How could I look for him? Have you forgotten?" The matter was over, and I didn't want to lie to her anymore. I straightforwardly told her, "The two of us ended a long time ago." Let me think. It probably started when I lost my child. I looked at her calmly and said, "Stella, do you remember? My child you killed with your own hands. This was the first step in the destruction of our emotional bond. However, even before this child, our conflicts had already become very sharp. Stella once had a very happy and complete family. Mr. Roberts was a businessman, and Mrs. Roberts was a music teacher who played the piano. Their family was rich, warm, and harmonious. Mrs. Roberts would sit by the window playing the piano while Stella and Mr. Roberts played games in the living room. This scene was something she always remembered, but everything was gone. The year Stella turned 16, Mr. Roberts suffered a business failure, accumulating a mountain of debt. Mrs. Roberts chose to divorce him. The family was gone. Her dad fled in the middle of the night. Without the layer of marriage, Mrs. Roberts, who was being pursued for debts, pushed Stella out at a critical moment, forcing her to take responsibility. Mrs. Roberts broke down, screaming that she was already divorced. "Doesn't he have a daughter? You should go find his daughter." All the problems fell on Stella's shoulders. Those creditors threatened to cut off one of Stella's hands to force her dad to come back. Stella's dad never returned. What happened later, I won't say. I became the most important person in Stella's life. We supported each other, stood by each other, and weathered the storms together, which brought us to today. On the day we achieved some success in our startup, her dad returned. Over the years, Mr. Roberts had endured a lot of hardship. When he came back, he was even limping on one leg. Mrs. Roberts had remarried years ago. She now had a new and happy family and even had children. Logically speaking, Stella's family, in a sense, was complete again, which could be seen as a way to make up for her regret. But at that moment, her family was facing a big problem. The son of an investor hit it off with Stella, and they were getting along very well with an ambiguous relationship. Facing a gamble that only had gains and no losses, Mr. Roberts, being a businessman, was very eager for his daughter to seize this opportunity. After all, I was just a poor guy who started from scratch, while the other party was a genuine rich second generation. The carp jumping over the dragon gate was nothing compared to this. He hoped his daughter could have a good life. But Stella had long been secretly married to me. We hadn't disclosed our marriage to the outside world to facilitate our work. In the eyes of outsiders, Stella was a female elite and very beautiful. Who wouldn't want to seize such a high-quality woman? Over the years, Mrs. Roberts and Mr. Roberts had felt very indebted to their daughter. Especially after experiencing the ups and downs of business, Stella had suffered a lot and endured numerous hardships. She was taciturn, cold, and strict, lacking warmth. In contrast, I had become more adaptable, worldly, and flexible. Our union was originally very good. But the olive branch extended by that investor was even better, allowing her to leap directly up the social ladder. Mr. Roberts and Mrs. Roberts certainly knew about the feelings between us over the years. They just didn't know about our marriage. So, privately, they spoke to me several times, hoping I could give up on Stella. When emotions ran high, Mrs. Roberts used her own example to prove her point. She said that when Mr. Roberts went bankrupt, he divorced her immediately to avoid dragging her down. Now she felt I should do the same and not hold Stella back. How can one stand in the way of their partner reaching someone better? At that time, I had just finished a project, working overtime for several days, feeling exhausted and downcast. I sat in front of them, forcing a smile. I'm not stopping her from reaching someone better. I'm stopping her from remarrying. This caught them completely off guard. Without hesitation, I pulled out my phone and showed them our marriage certificate photo. It was a total victory. Stella is great, but there are many good women out there. I said, even if she divorces me now to try her luck, a divorced woman might not necessarily be appreciated. And this company is built by me. If I leave, I'll take half with me. This directly blocked all paths. It left Mrs. Roberts and Mr. Roberts speechless, staring at each other. This also made them have a negative opinion of me. Stella loved me very much, but I wasn't the son-in-law they were satisfied with. All these years, Stella and I had been together through thick and thin. I genuinely felt that I was not only Stella's man but also her most important comrade. However, Stella's parents were traditional people, believing that men should earn money while women should enjoy life at home. They didn't agree with my approach. On the contrary, they became even more displeased with me. After the incident with the rich second-generation investor, they thought I had ruined Stella. Why couldn't Stella be a wealthy mistress, living a peaceful life? Why did their precious daughter have to work every day? Every day in the family was filled with arguments. Mr. Roberts and Mrs. Roberts argued with me. Stella argued with them, and I argued with Stella. My parents also joined the fray. It was endless. My parents believed that Stella and I had endured everything together for so many years. My dad scolded loudly. You two ran away without even wanting your daughter back then. What face do you have to show now? But Mr. Roberts and Mrs. Roberts didn't see it that way. They felt I wasn't worthy of Stella, looked down on me, and wanted me to hand over half of my company to Stella. The family crisis lasted about 3 to 4 years. Even the best of relationships couldn't withstand such grinding. But one day a turning point came because Stella was pregnant. She was unexpectedly pregnant and didn't want this child. During that time, Stella and I had already begun a Cold War. Stella Roberts' mother has heart disease, and she feels that I shouldn't be so forceful with her mother. After she got pregnant, Stella's parents went crazy trying to torment me. They did everything they could to force me to transfer all my assets into Stella and her family's name, making me give up everything. I refused. In the end, they chose the most extreme way. One day, after work, I took the elevator to the company's basement level 2, preparing to drive home. Suddenly, a group of people rushed out, threw a bag over my head, and dragged me into a car. After so many years in business, I had encountered my fair share of retaliation. Without hesitation, I fought back. During the struggle, Stella's father hit me hard on the head, right on the temple. I was struck so hard that blood poured from my nose, and I fell backward to the ground, my vision blurring. Yes, I lay there helplessly, unable to move. When I came to, I found that these people were frozen in place, all looking at me in fear. Their hats and masks had been torn off, revealing their true identities, Stella's relatives. Meanwhile, I lay on the ground, blood streaming from my mouth, eyes, ears, and nose looking quite terrifying. Someone's going to die, someone shouted in panic. You said you wanted to teach him a lesson, and now someone's going to die. No one dared to act anymore. In the end, it was the company's security that took me to the hospital. My parents were furious. They had never been this angry before. I was the only child in the family. When I insisted on being with Stella and worked to help her family pay off debts, they had already grown dissatisfied with her after all these years of hardship. So, after the incident, my parents reported it to the police without hesitation, pulling up the surveillance footage to have Stella's father jailed. At that moment, Stella knelt on the ground, pleading with my parents to show mercy. All right, I'll spare you, my mother cried as she sat by my hospital bed. Then why won't your parents spare my son? What did my son do wrong? Yes, he's not a rich second generation, but how has he treated you all these years? Don't you have any conscience? You're begging me to spare your parents. But where were you when they were beating my son? Each word cut deep. Stella trembled as she knelt on the ground. Her face was pale, yet she firmly said, "That's my dad. I can't let him go to jail. If you don't spare him, I'll have an abortion and divorce Holbrook." My parents went crazy upon hearing this. What good would such a daughter-in-law be? In the end, no one could persuade them. They resolutely sued Stella's father and refused to reconcile. Ultimately, he was convicted of intentional injury and went to prison. And Stella kept her word, going to the hospital alone to have the procedure done. Her heart was truly ruthless. Because of this incident, our feelings grew distant. Long-term arguments and daily torment took their toll. Not to mention her father still hadn't been released from prison. How could we be together? How could we face each other? How could we return to how we once were? A mirror shattered, turning into countless fragments. Even if a deity were present, there would be no way to piece it back together. I hated Stella in my heart. I hated her parents. Clearly, we were doing well, but her parents insisted on criticizing my ordinary background, looked down on me for not being a rich second generation, and forced me to transfer all my assets to them. Why should I give up everything just because her parents said so? I'm not that kind of person. I, Holbrook, am a good man. I have fire, wind, knives, and malice in my blood. Things escalated directly. I wouldn't back down. I wouldn't forgive. In the end, we lost the child. Stella lost her father once again. We resented and blamed each other deep down. So we argued, cursed, and yelled, faces flushed with rage. Our feelings slowly faded away, until finally, I caught Stella with her male secretary in bed. At that moment, I felt a sense of relief. Trapped in this torturous relationship, I was exhausted, and now that an outsider had entered the picture, everything collapsed. Our marriage had finally reached its end. Of course, I never imagined that one day I would see the young Stella again, the woman who loved me the most. Because when we were young, we had no idea we would end up here. But everything was irretrievable. Proved that my preemptive strike had its reasons. Because right after I took everything from Stella, Bernard Thomas went mad. He couldn't tolerate being publicly humiliated by Stella and absolutely couldn't accept taking on a woman with nothing. After all the effort he put in, was it all for this day? Stella had a splitting headache. She stumbled out, preparing to go to the hospital. Bernard was also heading back to the hospital. The secretary drove, and they sat in the back together. The car was filled with silence among the passengers. Seeing Stella Roberts in such a dazed and painful state, Bernard Thomas suddenly lost his mind. He was so angry that he directly reached out to open the car door and pushed Stella out. As the vehicle was moving, the door suddenly swung open. There was also a deliberate shove. Although the speed wasn't fast, Stella, caught off guard, fell hard to the ground. Fortunately, there weren't many cars on the road, so she didn't end up under the wheels. However, her head hit the roadside greenery with a heavy thud. "Have you lost your mind?" The secretary quickly slammed on the brakes. Still shaken, she shouted, "Ms. Roberts, I asked you to ruin their relationship and get them divorced, not to endanger her life." Meanwhile, Bernard was sitting in the back seat, laughing maniacally. He laughed. "That wife of yours, did you manage to kick Holbrook Smith out of the company? Crazy." They were all crazy. The secretary rushed out of the car to save her. Stella was already completely limp, collapsed next to the greenery. There was a pool of blood under her head, her life hanging in the balance. Just a moment ago, she had finished securing a safe deposit box at the bank. Now, I received a call from the hospital. Last time, Stella crashed into the guardrail while driving. This time, she hit her head against the greenery. I must admit that's quite impressive, and a bit foolish. I didn't want to go at first, but the secretary's relentless calls were driving me crazy. So I went anyway. I thought that maybe 20-year-old Stella was a bit difficult, and I needed to go to the hospital to reassure her. So when I arrived at the hospital quickly, ready to comfort her, I pulled back the curtain and saw a pair of calm yet weary eyes. I froze at that moment. Stella was lying on the hospital bed, her head wrapped in thick bandages. I stood a short distance away, momentarily at a loss for what to do or say, because between us, there hadn't been anything to say for a long time. Finally, I politely said, "Ms. Roberts, long time no see." She didn't say anything, just looked at me with those calm, tired eyes. "Take care of yourself," I politely added. "See you at the Civil Affairs Bureau next Wednesday. Let's not have any more accidents." Bernard was arrested. This was something I never expected. His reckless actions led the police to intervene and subsequently brought in professionals to recover the dashcam footage from Stella's last car accident. That footage recorded their argument. Bernard was hysterical, while Stella looked on with disdain. It also revealed an important piece of information. Bernard was hired by Stella's mother. He was the son of her mother's close friend, eager to push me aside and become the wealthy son-in-law. And the secretary was also hired by Stella's mother. She was prepared to scheme against me. But Bernard was insane. On the highway, he grabbed Stella's steering wheel. The car was moving fast, veered off course, and crashed straight into the guardrail, flipping over. Bernard was on the right side and was seriously injured. This time, he went mad again, successfully landing himself in jail. Hearing about this, my feelings were complicated. Parents love their children, but for their daughter, they look down on other families' sons. Perhaps Ms. Roberts is just fated to be single. At this moment, we stood at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau, holding our documents, waiting for our number to be called. I sarcastically remarked, "The men you meet are basically all a little crazy. Either they're workaholics or love-obsessed. You should keep your eyes open and find a wealthy second-generation guy to please your parents. I just don't know which unlucky son has to serve your family." Stella's head injury hadn't healed yet. It was wrapped in a thick layer of bandages. She looked a bit like an Indian, which was somewhat comical. Inside the Civil Affairs Bureau, there were couples getting married and others getting divorced. There was no shortage of laughter, anger, and quarrels. My little sarcasm was nothing to them. She looked at me, calm, weary, yet somewhat dazed, not knowing what she was really thinking. Maybe her head was injured. She suddenly asked me, "Do you hate me?" I countered, "Don't you hate me?" She shook her head. "No, I don't hate you." I smiled. "Well, thank you," I said sincerely. "After all, you're leaving with nothing now." But the next moment, what I never expected happened. Stella looked at the marriage certificate in her hand and suddenly took my hand. Her tone softened, cautiously, with a hint of pleading. She asked me, "Can we not get divorced? Can we start over?" It was over. She really must have hit her head hard. My gaze shifted slightly. "Have you lost your memory again?" "No. Holbrook," she said. At that moment, I felt like I was going to die. All the past events flashed before my eyes like a movie. "I'm sorry for what I did. Can we start over?" Faced with her request, I didn't reply. Instead, I asked her, "Do you know what I was thinking when you had your accident?" Stella shook her head, indicating she didn't know. At that time, I was sitting there. I pointed to a corner of the Civil Affairs Bureau, waiting for you for 4 or 5 hours, and you didn't come. "Do you know? I heard you were in a car accident and lost your memory. I was wondering why you didn't die." Stella Roberts froze in place. I laughed. "If you had died in that car accident, I would have inherited all the assets. No one would think I was pitiful. If you had died back then, it would have been the best ending. You ask me if I hate you? How could I not hate you? I'm 30 years old, you cheated on me, you kicked me out of the company. I lost my career and my family. I've suffered for half my life for nothing. Your parents mistreated me, hurt me. You're the same. You were at home in our marital home, fooling around with other men. You ask me if I hate you? I wish you would just die right now." I laughed heartily, almost to the point of tears, not even knowing what I was laughing at. Maybe I was laughing at her foolishness, thinking she could turn back. Stella stood there, unable to say a word, until the bright red marriage certificate was taken from our hands and the divorce certificate was issued. I felt satisfied. As I was leaving, I got into the car and saw she was still standing there. I suddenly turned back and said to her, "If you really can't handle it, you can hate me. I'll take more of the marital assets. It's what you owe me. If you're not happy about it, go ahead and sue me." This made Stella Roberts tremble all over. She looked at me, as if the 20-year-old and the 30-year-old Stella were overlapping. But her lips trembled, and she looked miserable. At 20, we were inseparable. At 30, we were still quite wealthy. Now she has lost everything. From now on, I will completely leave her behind. She stood there watching me drive away, not turning back even once. So be it. The story isn't long and isn't hard to tell. We met, loved, and couldn't be together. In the future, she will pursue her future and I will go my own way. The greatest regret in the world is that we once had a good beginning but didn't have a proper farewell. Although many years ago, when we were still young, we thought we could accompany each other through mountains and rivers.